Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on teaching microbits online with me, Beverly Clark, as your host and Holly Billinghurst as your presenter. I am the CAS National Community Manager responsible for the management and delivery of the Computing at School Community of Practice programme as a part of the NCCE, which is the National Centre for Computing Education. During today's session, you'll be learning about setting up the microbits for year 7 to 9 and doing everything online, creating a microbit classroom, running a lesson, and generating feedback files. So Holly will be guiding you through all of that. This webinar is part of a series of webinars designed to support the CAS community with remote working, learning and teaching. It is a part of the CAS Inspire program. If you are tweeting, please use the hashtag CASInspire20. During the session, please use the question window on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions. The top of the window has an orange rectangle which can be expanded or collapsed. There's also a copy of the webinar notes available to download during the session, and Holly will direct you to those later on. As I mentioned, if you're tweeting, please do use the hashtag CASInspire20. Thank you and welcome, and I'll now hand you over to Holly. So I'm just swapping to Holly.
Fabulous stuff. Okay, and I'm going to make sure you can see my screen. Right, welcome to another one of our CAS Inspire webinars. It's really nice to see some of you. I recognise lots of names in there, and we've already had a message from Bart. Thank you very much. It's nice to see you again as well. Okay, so we are going to be looking at microbit classrooms today. I'm actually going to use a few little bits and pieces. I'm going to make sure that I have my camera on because I'm going to be looking at the ability for us to be using both physical and also digital versions of the microbit classrooms. So could I get everybody who is in here to give me a hands up if you have taught a microbit lesson before? Excellent, I've got a couple, I've got loads of hands up. So the fact that I've got my little microbit with me shouldn't be a surprise. Fabulous. Okay, so I'm running a number of online groups at the moment where we are using microbits. We're using the microbit classroom to keep that digital learning going. And what we're going to be looking at today is the ability to be able to, first of all, set up our voice applications for year 7 to 9, because of course they are quite likely going to be using these on a regular basis anyway, but actually setting out our rules for using it for our younger students. We're going to be looking at using the microbit classroom to create a pre-built lesson to make your lives a lot easier, creating your own starter code and making sure that's saved, being able to view your student code live and in action, and actually also being able to save your classroom. And saving your classroom is going to make life an awful lot easier, because one of the things you can do is to have a classroom and actually take that code, including your students' code, and move it on to the next lesson. So you can actually, you don't have to have a single standalone lesson. You can actually set up essentially a half-term worth of code and keep that going all the way through. And then finally, we're going to be looking at generating feedback, because whoever talked to the Microsoft Classroom organisers and developers clearly knew that teachers wanted to be able to generate feedback easily and also be able to take that and send it in, excuse me, to their students. The nice thing about this is it also generates you a nice online register. Okay, so one thing I wanted to make sure that we were being very open about in terms of our CAS Inspire webinars is that no resource is going to be perfect for absolutely everybody. One thing that we have looked at over the course of a number of our webinars is that you need to consider your class dynamic, look at the class size as well, look at what you're actually trying to achieve, and also consider what worked in your physical classroom. Because because ultimately what we want to be doing is creating these resources that aren't just going to be utilized for our digital classrooms, but also things that we can then take back into our physical classrooms and be able to run these lessons, not just with the students who are in our class, but we are quite likely going to have to juggle students who are physically in front of us and also who are learning from home as well. So I'm trying to make sure that obviously we're looking at this from a very sympathetic angle and very much sort of understanding that you are going to be in a very difficult position in terms of juggling your students. So we want to try and reduce the workload rather than create some more for you. So we are going to be using specifically the MakeCode classroom. And one thing I have done over the course of this week is to drag in my unsuspecting victims, which are my own children, to actually create some videos for you so you can see this in action. So obviously be aware that when I'm presenting this, I'm presenting it with a small number of students because I wanted to have something which I could show you live and actually give you copies of. So therefore I could get permission from just a few. So let's start off by showing you how to actually set up the classroom. So in this case, you go to the classroom itself. You can actually name your activity. Now that will allow your students to actually see this as a title on their screen. And you can also choose between Python and the MakeCode. So MakeCode will allow you to go through the block language and it will also allow you to use JavaScript as well. So that actually takes you all the way from our Key Stage 2 all the way up to Key Stage 4. So this is what the Python version looks like. And I wanted to identify this very early on because if you are using the Python version, you need to make sure that every single student that is following your class also has one of these. Unfortunately, at this particular point, the emulator is not working with the Python version. So just obviously be aware that if your students don't have their physical microbit, then using Python perhaps isn't the way to go for you. However, you may find that actually you're presenting this to a small amount of students who do have this, or you want them to follow along later, and therefore they can have their physical microbits. So I'm just going to pop that back over here so it doesn't get broken. So you can see there, you can essentially create your initial code. So the idea with the classroom is that you would go in, you would create some skeleton code, and I'm going to come back to the model of Prim a little bit later, because obviously with our Prim we are looking at setting up these classrooms for our Key Stage 3 students with initially some code that they can run, so they get that instant hit of something works. And of course, with every language, we've got that issue of you can read it first, and then we're then starting to adapt it. So we are manipulating, and then finally we are making. So this is how my students enter the classroom. So you can see here, you give them microbit.org/join. It's the same every time. If you've been using something like Kahoot, they're going to be really, really used to this. Then you actually give them a set of drop downs, and then they have to select that from their example, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. So I've recorded this from the teacher's side, which is what you're seeing here, and also from the student side. So you have instructions, editor, dashboard, and student code across the top. I am in the Save Classroom section. So you can see there, you can download your classroom file, and you can also end your session. If you are setting up in advance, one of the things that I would highly recommend is that you create your skeleton code and then you download your classroom file as the HTML. I'm going to show you this again a little bit later. But when you are setting up in advance, unless you have got time to set up or you are importing from a pre-created lesson, what you are going to want to do in this particular circumstance is you want to set up all of your code, download the file, and then you double click on that file to then launch it again. So initially, I'm going to look at just setting up the live classroom, allowing our students to join, how we access the code, and then a little bit later on, we'll go into a little bit more detail about how to set up your personal skeleton code and have a set of lessons that you can just access and also share with your colleagues as well. Okay, if you do have any questions, please do put them into the question box as we go. I'm more than happy to answer them and adapt what we're doing throughout the session to make this work for you. The other thing that I would just like to confirm with you, I'm just having a quick look to see who is in and where we are. Yeah, so we have some questions on there at the moment. I'm just going to pop that out. And pop that down here. Super stuff. Okay. Okay. So this is what it looks like from the student's perspective. From a student perspective, you can see there they go to microbit.org/join, and then they get these 4 little drop downs. Now this works brilliantly for my Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 students because we don't have to worry about the spelling, the grammar. Have you typed in this particular animal's name correctly? Is it uppercase, lowercase? They quite literally select a colour, animal, transport, and object, and they find it really funny that you just asked them to go and select a panda. So in this case, this is me joining my own classroom, which was a little bit strange and meta. In this case, I was going to go to my colour. You can see there, you've got the actual colours and the names of the colours as well. So of course, we're talking about our Key Stage 3 students who are in mixed ability classes. This allows students who are low and high ability levels to access the same thing. They do have to put a PIN in. And then after that, they are asked to put their name in. So if you were joining us a few weeks ago, we were talking about selecting usernames. So this is your e-safety moment with your students. They have the ability to use that screen name generator, or you ask them to create something linked to the e-safety topic where their screen name is potentially something which is not their proper name. And you saw there, if I go back a little bit in the video, if I pause this, we have, at the moment, we have 3 students. You can see me, I'm in the middle. I've used my actual name. Whereas we have Bean and we have Corone in there. They are using screen names which have been assigned to them. And if you go back and watch our previous webinar, what we have done is each one of those names has actually been assigned to a student. So when they join my classes, they join using those screen names. When they come into their digital rooms, they go into their digital rooms using those screen names. So I know who it is, and the other students around them know who it is. But if we have got, so think about the safeguarding issues of other people seeing screens. If they don't want to use their full names, we are actually embedding those things that we teach them about e-safety immediately. Neil, you've just asked where you can access the other webinars. I am going to get Beverly to pop you a message with some links on there. Okay, so in terms of this, what we had here, if I go all the way back, there was me with my code. So I had to put my name in to start off with. So again, we do have the ability to go in there and change those names as a teacher, and you'll see that in a second. So they get this lovely emulator without any code initially. So you can see there, I've gone in as me as a teacher, and what I would need to do is to go into my editor. So my editor is where I have set up my skeleton code, and I can then share that code with the students. Now, if I have students who are joining later, I can just select the students who I want to send the code to, and you can see there is a link at the top that says share code with students, and then they get this. They can then select use code and they get that skeleton code. So you can have students who are actually starting from scratch. So they might be at the end of Prim. You might have students who actually need that skeleton code so they can see something running first, and then you can share that. So you've got your differentiation directly in your classroom. So for this one, I've used a little bit of music in there. I've sent that out and I've said to my students, we're creating our pedometer, and I wanted them to adapt it, and I wanted them to be really creative. In this case, I actually gave them a little bit of free rein to really play with the system. So in this case, from there, I was then able to see the student's code, but I'm actually going to go into the student's code as well. Now, there are a number of ways that you can create these lessons. Now, I know that right now we are under a huge amount of pressure in terms of planning lessons and creating content. So if you wanted to create something very quickly and you wanted to test out potentially a lesson with your students, there is actually a selection of pre-built lessons that teachers have submitted, and it covers a range of subjects as well. So if you are teaching Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 and you want to do a little bit of collaboration with another teacher, you can actually select topics that cover science, geography, maths, art, loads and loads of other different things. And they are all put in their different sections. So you can filter by subject, you can filter by key stage. It is worth being aware that the majority of lessons in here are ages 7 to 14, but there's nothing to stop you from creating those lessons for GCSE. So you can see here, I went to the classroom, I went to View More, and then on that View More, at the bottom, you can actually browse projects and browse lessons. So I browsed some lessons, and you can see here, I decided actually I was going to stick with computer science. I went for computational thinking because that's one of my favorite topics. And in there, I went for an algorithms lesson. Now, the algorithms lesson actually gave me a set of different types of lessons that I could then access that all linked to algorithms. And you can see there's an entire unit of work, but this particular one was more sort of 7 to 11, and I realized that actually it wasn't maybe for my students. I was looking for Key Stage 3, so I selected 11 to 14 at the top, and instantly all of those Key Stage 3 pre-built sections of lessons automatically came up for me. So I decided to look at the health tech. Now, the nice thing about the health tech lessons is that you can actually download the bundle and it will give you absolutely everything. So that includes your lesson plans, your PowerPoints, it also comes with Word documents for the students to fill in. So you've got worksheets in there, and you can see how it actually links across the curriculum. So an awful lot of work has gone into this. So I downloaded the whole thing and just saved it as a zip file. One of the things that it's worthwhile mentioning is that not every single lesson is a microbit lesson. There's a lot of planning in there. They actually take you all the way through the full systems development lifecycle. So you've got the ability to show them, how are you planning? How are you developing? Where are you testing this? Think about your evaluation. So you can see there you've got health tech, so you can bring in some science in there. It gives you your lesson summary, your objectives, and also how long it thinks it should take. I would also take that with a pinch of salt. Mainly because their 60-minute lessons have on average been taking me probably an hour and a half, a little bit longer, specifically online, because of course we're looking for the ability to help our students debug from afar. So you can see here, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go into my prototyping. I wanted to see the one with the code to start off with. And what I was doing here was to have a look. Now I started off by clicking on the programming tool with MakeCode. And then that instantly took me to my MakeCode classroom, but without any code. So realizing that actually that little quick links at the top is not where I want to go. Just be aware of that. What it does just opens up the classroom for you so you can introduce what it actually looks like. In this case, if I wanted to open up specifically the code that they use, I would want to do this. So let's make sure we've got here, we would go to that particular area and also scroll all the way down. You're going to do that. There we go. So there is where you get your area of your lessons. So you can see you've got your download whole unit, but actually go down to the lesson plans at the bottom. That will actually show you what's in each of the lessons. And you can see there how many slides there are, how long it should take you, and you can see which one of them actually has code pre-built for you. So you can see there's code available. So what I was able to do was to give a bit of an idea in terms of that lesson. Here is the code that was part of that particular lesson. And then what I can do is I can click the bit that says open in Classroom. If you open it in MakeCode, it's just personal to you. But if you open it in Classroom, in that case, it gives you this area here. So you need to rename it. So that is a step tracker example. I decided to call this one step tracker lesson, and then I gave it my name as well. So you can change this into anything that you like. And then for this one, there was only MakeCode available. Now that means that you've got the option of the blocks or JavaScript. So it's not taking away the ability to do a text-based language. So you can still do JavaScript for this one. So you can see there that's changed. We had a yellow frog car and a sunglasses and a new pin. And then at that point, obviously I didn't have any students in my classroom. So I go to my editor, and then once I had students in the classroom, I could then share that code with my students. So I'm not necessarily having to develop anything at that point because somebody has already given me a whole unit of information, which includes coding, but also includes lots of other areas. So we were looking at algorithms. We were able to bring in other subjects. So I was actually able to team teach with another teacher. From this, we were then able to kind of run a set of lessons. Okay, at this point, I'm actually going to pause for a second, take a breath and see if anybody has any questions so far, specifically in terms of accessing the resources or using that with students, using it with your students or sharing any links or anything like that. Okay, so we've got some links going out to everybody, but nothing so far. Awesome. Okay. So one of the things that I've been more keen on doing is actually setting up my own starter code because I teach mainly Key Stage 3 up to Key Stage 5. And I've actually found out that the MakeCode is absolutely suitable for any of those key stage. I tend not to use it so much with Key Stage 5 because obviously there is a restriction in terms of how much you can do, but it's a really nice introduction to Arduinos. Oh, we have a question. Is there any link with GitHub? You've used that to make built-in instructions for projects. Unfortunately, at the moment, no, there isn't. I believe that is because it's quite closely linked with Microsoft. So a lot of the stuff that they're doing is kind of linking to their own proprietary areas. At the moment, what you would do would be to save your classroom. You download it as an HTML. Actually, when you relaunch the HTML, it automatically relaunches your classroom. If you want to share that with other other teachers, you share the HTML file, but I will return to that a little bit later on. But unfortunately, no, not at the moment. There is no GitHub link. So in terms of this one, you have the option of making your code directly. I know, a sad face there from Alice, but absolutely no, I completely agree. It is a shame, and I'd really like to see a GitHub link as well. But do remember that this is still in beta, so it is still quite new, and therefore anything that we asked for, it is entirely possible that they'll add that. So I go through and I build the code depending on the students that I'm running this for. So if I'm running this for my Key Stage 4 students, I will quite likely just go straight into the JavaScript and add it all in and then just run. But the nice thing about this is you can actually create it in the block language and then switch over. And then you can actually see what the JavaScript looks like. So in terms of this, what I decided to do is I was going to create some code. You can see there, I can just drag this in. I wanted to create some skeleton code at this particular stage. And I wanted to give my students a bit of an input-output introduction lesson. So you can see here, I decided to put a welcome message, and I instantly regretted this particular welcome message because it was enormous. And we have to remember when you have the output, it's not coming up on a screen, it's having to scroll past. So anything which is more than a couple of words takes an absolute age to test. And you can see that happening on the screen at the moment. The next thing was I actually created some variables for my students to use. So remember, if we're talking about the PRIM model, at this stage, they are going to predict what is happening. They will then test that prediction by running the code. So when you share your code with your students, they are then able to run that first section of PRIM, and then it allows you to create that differentiation, because some students will see this. You might decide not to share the code with everybody. You might share it with just some students and put them into pairs and see if they can actually work their way through. In this case, I've given them 2 variables. They actually needed 4 for the task that we did. So I was giving them hints at this stage because I'm giving them color codes. So very similar to using Scratch. They've got that color-coded block. At this stage, I have set my binary number, and actually what that we were doing is through the course of a couple of lessons, we had some Key Stage 3 students and a few Key Stage 4 students who were coming in and they were creating binary numbers from a denary number by pressing the buttons. Now for this one, because of course we've got the emulator, it doesn't matter whether they've got their physical kit or not. But it was really interesting to see that this has evolved from the initial groups that I was running to a number of students going, I really, really want one of these things, and creating some of the most amazing stuff without any real input from me actually between lessons. Certainly from this particular lesson, I had one of my students send me in a piece of music they'd created when you got to a certain number of steps. So I've got some inputs already. And you can see there that in terms of actually creating procedural languages using our block language, it's nice and simple. But then when you have your students who are just at the edge of Key Stage 3 and dipping into Key Stage 4, what you're then able to do is to then switch that over into JavaScript and then explain the concept of a procedural language, because you've got a function up there, but actually we can then talk about whether it is a function or a procedure. Okay, so we have a question. Did you set this code up before the lesson, or did you discuss what you were doing? So as a general rule, what I do is I actually set up some of the code prior to the lesson. So I don't want to start from scratch, but I tend not to finish it. So I have something that functions at a very, very basic level. And then moving forward, I would then take this and share those. I think some of you have seen some of the streamed lessons I've been doing each week, where on a Friday we have our creative mode, and we've been bringing in things like JavaScript. We've been looking at block languages, and lots of the students who are joining in with that have been doing the same sort of thing. So we start with some code and then I show how to build it up. Okay, so Alice, you sent me a link, which I'm absolutely going to use. So this sort of thing you've been building for students to use. So it's surprising how much easier it is to have instructions available without having to swap between browser tabs. Isn't it just? I have to say, having the student code instantly in front of me has been a real game changer. Where we have lots of students coding live, what I tend to do for my older students is obviously to use REPL and things like that. So I have hundreds of tabs open so I can see them all coding. whereas this actually gave this to me instantly. So you can see on for this one, if I wanted to see my students' code, so Alice is talking there about having already been able to set this up and see the students directly in the browser. So one thing to remember at this point is that students aren't actually collaborating live. They are completing their own code. They can, you and the student can see it, but they can't see each other's code. So they're not working in pairs. We're not talking about pair programming at this point. So the nice thing about this is once you've finished, you can then go over to the student's code. I'm just going to finish this off. And then it refreshes periodically. So it's important to remember that it's not instant. So you may have a little bit of time lag in terms of waiting for them to finish. So you can see here, Bean was going off into the distance and having an absolute whale of a time with the code that we were creating. So I'm able to then have a look at that. The nice thing about that is you can then share that code with students. So you can then, if somebody is really, really stuck, you could take another student's code and then share it with a different student. You can see here Holly, who is clearly not paying attention, has not actually done anything with the code. So potentially at this point, you might ask a few questions. You might get somebody to describe what they're doing with their particular piece of code. Or I might go back to Bean's code and say, actually, I'm going to share this with Holly. So give you a little bit of a boost to move forward. Corone here has been starting, but you can see that they're slightly behind. So at this one, I can actually see how my students are getting on. And certainly for this one, anything which has the cross-hatching means that the code won't run. So I can see at this point, actually, Bean was okay because they were moving around the different notes. But at this point, I might be talking about them. I can see middle C, middle C, middle C, middle C. There's an awful lot of those. I might start talking about loops and give them a little bit of verbal feedback. But that verbal feedback is going to go to the whole group, which means that actually what you're doing is, although you are feeding back to one student, you are then also giving the whole group an idea of how you can move forward. Oh, excellent. So, oh, you're giving interactive instructions in MakeCode. So you're sharing the code and instructions with the student. Oh, that would have been amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't, and actually that's something I think I may completely take it and use in my classrooms. I really like that idea. Actually share it, having your code. So I'm assuming your code actually has the instructions built in. That's amazing. I really like that idea. So I tend to make mine verbal instructions. So my classes at the moment are very much a live me explaining, and I will have a conversation with my students. I also tend to have, because I'm using, I use Zoom for my classes, I don't think it actually makes any difference which VoIP application you're using. I use a screen share so they can actually see what I'm looking at. So while they're coding at the same time, they're also seeing what I'm looking at, and I'm saying, oh, look, at this point, Bean's doing really well. Oh, Corone, you've done this little bit here. And then they can see why I'm giving a particular piece of feedback, or if somebody's done something absolutely amazing, I will highlight that as part of my code as well. So there is an example. Now I'm pretty sure that's an awful place to start. I'm pretty sure this will start halfway through. So you can see that this is actually one of the live lessons that I have been I've been running. I have a number of things running on my screen. You certainly don't have to be to have all of the tech running, but this in terms of sharing the screen while you're doing the MakeCode, so students can see their own version. Mine is running on here, so I can actually show them how to then download that onto their microbits. So I've got multiple cameras running. But you can see there that I actually have the blocks. I'm sharing code with my students and also giving a little bit of feedback. And at this point, I can then go through each of my students' code, and at that point I was actually talking them through some of the issues they were having. Some of them were actually taking this, we were doing logic gates for this particular lesson. That link at the top, which is the bit.ly link, will take you direct to that video if you want to have an example of what those kind of classes might look like. Your classes might be entirely different. And the really lovely thing about this is that you can still teach in your style as if you are in an actual classroom. So if you imagine each one of those links is purely looking at that student's desktop, so you can still give the same feedback. So we've got here, use the Markdown language in GitHub, so include blocks, images, hints, even YouTube videos. I will have a look at that, and I think possibly share that with Beverly as well. So if we were able to embed that, it would be absolutely amazing. Yeah, so ultimately, if we can embed feedback and we can embed instructions into a live classroom, that allows students to be a little bit more independent. So ultimately, we're looking for students to really sort of take that independence and move forward with it. My personal teaching style, and this doesn't have to reflect on anybody else's, is I try and make my digital classrooms as much like my physical classrooms as I possibly can. So a lot of my students are very much sort of a verbal feedback. We try not to do too much written feedback, but of course we do have to do some. I'm going to, you can see there, we'll see with the cameras as well, if you are using your VoIP application to run with those cameras, you are able to do that kind of instruction at the same time. And it's very much up to you whether you want to have something where you are talking to your students so you can actually hear them as well, or whether they are sending you messages via text. Again, consider how you would run your actual classroom and then make that sort of as a digital version. So while we are then moving into this strange situation where we have students both at home and in the classroom, we want to make sure that the communication is going to be very, very similar. This does mean that if you are running your VoIP application whilst you are running your in-person classroom, the people who are at home will want to hear what's going on in the classroom, and equally the people in the classroom need to find out what questions are being asked by those students who are at home. So it might be worth having maybe a document where they can actually place their questions. And last time when we had our last webinar, we talked about using our SNOT feature for actually using things like Google Classroom or using Google Forms to actually have a list of questions that students want to ask. So I'm going to move on with this and keep going. Ooh. There we go. So one of the big things we want to be able to do is to save a classroom as well. And saving a classroom, ultimately what you are doing is you are saving an HTML file. So what this does is it allows you to save your code. It also saves all of the student code as well. So students can actually save the code themselves. They can download that as a hex file. However, you can also save your entire classroom and you can see how many people have joined for each particular one. So in this case, when you then relaunch your classroom, just be aware that the classroom name and the PIN will change for each session. So classes through the MakeCode website are not persistent. So it's not like the classrooms that you would have in Google Classroom or anywhere else. Once you have closed down your session, then the actual classroom session itself has closed. So if you want to save that and rerun, you do have to download your classroom. Okay, so while we look at this, I am going to just remind you that you can pop through and you can add some questions as we go. And there are some handouts. So if you did want to take notes at this stage, there is a handout of all of the slides, which you can download from here. And that handout section is on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'm just going to circle back to the beginning of that one. You can see there, you hand out everything. You've got all your students there. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more students. And at this stage, the first thing I am going to do is to download my report for my students. We are going to come back to writing reports though. The next thing I would do is to go to the Save Classroom. So this is essentially the end of my class. My students have probably left. I'm going to go to the Download the Classroom HTML file before I close it down. This is going to be saved. Now, this gives you a very strange name. I would highly recommend renaming each one of those HTML files so you know exactly what it is. And then when you want to resume your classroom, all you would do is you would then go back into your folders, you double click that HTML link, and it's going to relaunch your classroom with all of your saved code. So essentially what it does is it puts all of those hex files back into a classroom environment. So hopefully this is where we resume. There we go. You can see there, that's what it looks like. I rename them. I do find those particular naming conventions a little bit difficult to follow, so I might decide to use the BCS CAS Inspire as my name so that I can actually have my standard naming conventions. I may even want to use like a date format or a class name. It's completely up to you, but I would definitely rename them. It does save the student progress as well, Neil, yes. So this will create your all of your code and all of the student progress. So the next time they log into your classroom, they will go back into their code and they can just continue. So you can see there, it's there, and then essentially what you do is you double click and it relaunches with absolutely everything. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a second in case anybody has any questions about creating their own code, saving a classroom, or relaunching. If only because I'm losing my voice. Okay, right. Final thing is to download your student files. I find this really useful. At the end of each lesson, before I save the classroom, I go into the View My Student Code and I click on the Download Report for all students as a Word document. What this is going to do, oh yes, so Pam, you had trouble with your internet, that's absolutely fine. Yes, this will be available again. You will get a link to the video, so this is being recorded, yes. In terms of the Word report, this is going to give you lots and lots of information. They've clearly been talking to students. It includes a classroom code, a register, images of the student code, but it is worth mentioning that the images are not perfect yet. Do remember that this is still in beta. So at this stage, what I would be doing is I would be clicking that link at the top once I have checked out to make sure that my students have got to a stage. Now, it doesn't actually matter what stage your students are at. This is going to give you an idea of how much progress has been made. And if you are showing that students are making progress in your lessons, downloading that Word report is absolutely amazing because it will show quite clearly what the students have done at each stage. So here, that's going to give me my Word report. It generates it as a nice Word document. Initially, I just did an open with because I wanted to add some more things before I saved it. I would highly recommend saving it very quickly. So you can see there, it gives you your activity name, the date that you saved it, how many students were there, and it also gives you the status. So if students think that they're finished and they click done, it'll actually show that the students have said that they're done with the whole thing. You then get to see the progress of their work. Now, just be aware with the images that they actually do overlap and they go over the edges of the Word section. So you can see there, I added in a little bit of written feedback for each of my students. So if you are looking at giving them written feedback and you want to give them a short report, you might decide to do that at the end of a topic, or you might want to do that for each lesson. It is entirely up to you. Now, this is obviously down to your feedback policy. So you can use this to reflect your own school's feedback policy. I decided to add in just a sentence for each student to give them something to move forward with for next time. Obviously, with this particular student who didn't do anything, I just added a little question there to work out whether they'd had technical issues. So you can see right now, this is the issue with the images at the moment. There is lots of white space. You do need to crop them down. Now, obviously, with a class of 30 or more, that's a little bit of an onerous piece of admin. However, it didn't take huge amounts of time, and it really did mean that my reports could go back out to the students and be really, really useful to them. It helped them make progress. And also, if you wanted to just keep something for your own records, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to crop them down. You might decide that you're actually going to keep this, save it as a Word document, and when you need to go back and show progress, you've then got your evidence directly there. And it's all in a Word document. So if you need to make it look presentable and printable, then you can obviously do that at a later date. But if you do want to use it as feedback that you're going to send to each student, then obviously do be aware that you might need to make it a bit smaller and then crop it down. Okay, so Niels asked, how do you share the report with the students? Ultimately, what I did is I printed each page to a PDF. I tend to use an awful lot of Google Classroom. So when I give my feedback, I create a little PDF for that individual student by just printing that page, and then I upload it to their feedback there. The alternative is that you can then pop that into a shared folder with them. You could email it to them. I quite like taking some of these. So when my students that are doing really, really well, I will take that one particular PDF and I will email it home as well. So if I want to send something home and say your child is doing really, really well, here's the evidence. Here's the amazing stuff that they've been doing, and it's a nice, quick way of getting at that contact home as well. Okay, so finally, and obviously you also have your register at the beginning. Now I find the register really, really helpful because if you are trying to run a online classroom and you've got people in your classroom at the same time and you're trying to do a presentation and you're also trying to manage all these different students, if you need to then update your register after the class, you are going to have a list of students who are there. And so therefore you can then go back retrospectively and make sure that your registers are filled in. Now obviously with students who are physically there, that's going to be a little bit different. You need to make sure that they are registered immediately. But if you do need to then register the students who are not physically in the classroom and you need some way of showing who was and wasn't there, this is quite a nice way of using your comparison. So you can actually show who is physically in your classroom versus who you are actually teaching. And then you've got that little bit of differentiation there. Okay, but it is worth bearing in mind that obviously this is still in beta, so there are still a few little, we'll call them features at the moment, that just need ironing out. Okay, so I'm going to come back to Prim because the Prim method of teaching code is just one of my favorites, and we see it so many different times. I've seen this in so many different webinars and I keep coming back and keep coming back, and it really, really works for the students, especially at Key Stage 3. Using our pre-created teacher code, or we can use those pre-created Make Code lessons. They are going to make your life so much easier, especially if you are new to this. Don't feel that you have to make everything yourself. Pre-created resources are there for a reason, especially in places like this. If you are going onto a site that has pre-created resources, the majority of them are going to be edited. They're going to be bringing people in, doing quality assurance. So although they are not going to be perfect and unique to you, they are going to save you time, and there is no shame in using a pre-created resource. Demonstrate your code through screen sharing. That's really, really helpful. You've been obviously having your screen share, and I have my PowerPoint. And I am completely aware that today has been a little bit of death by PowerPoint. However, if you are actually sharing your screen and they can see you coding at the same time, students will become really, really engaged with what you're doing. If you are using the first sections of PRIM, we are predicting using your code, and then they can test their theories. So that works really, really well for our lower ability students, or trying to boost students' confidence because they can actually see it. Then we can get into that middle section. So this is really where our Key Stage 3 students, we want them to be, at least at this stage, because they're going to take your code, they're going to adapt it, we want them to engage, we want them to pull it to pieces. And the first thing I tell all of my students is, here we go, here's some code I've made, I want you to break it. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me how to investigate what's wrong with this code. Find all of the errors that I've left there for you, which clearly I haven't, because although I leave a few in there, but not all of them are on purpose. But those students will find them and they will tell me about them, which is brilliant. And actually that's what I want them to be able to do, because if they can fix the errors, they are going to be more independent. So I set my challenges to my students. You saw what was going on there in terms of adapting or improving that code, and then being able to give that feedback live, and then potentially even using your screen share to share the best solution. So even with skeleton code, there's absolutely no ceiling, and our more confident students can go from that block code into JavaScript. So we've got huge amounts of differentiation there. And then finally, we want them to make things. So setting your coding challenges, go and use things like the OCR coding challenges. There are 40 of them, and the majority of them can actually be brought into an adapted version of MakeCode. So allow them to create their own block code, or allow them to then go in and play with the JavaScript and boost their confidence. If they're not ready for JavaScript, create the blocks and then read it back in the JavaScript. I'm going to take a deep breath now and hand back to Beverly. Thank you so much for coming to this one. Beverly, over to you.
Hello, thank you so much, Holly. Thank you. I also lost my internet connection during that, some hotspotting. So these are all the technical difficulties you have while working online. It's a moment of panic. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm very pleased to share some additional information with you. We've got the CAS Virtual Showcase, which replaces our series of some face-to-face summer conferences. So that's a fortnight of online. It's all online, it's webinars, it's keynotes, it's workshops, and it's all free, of course. So it's a CAS community coming together in this crisis to continue working together. So please do go to the CAS website and sign up for the CAS Virtual Showcase. And also we do have our home learning teaching pages. And tomorrow morning, look out for an announcement with some home learning resources, which we're releasing tomorrow morning. If there are any questions, please do feel free to email in if there are any requests for further workshops, and please spread the news. Thank you, everyone.